The desert wind screamed across the plains, carrying with it dust, grit, and the scent of coming rain. The sun had just fallen behind the red hills, leaving the sky streaked with blood-colored clouds. Jake Sullivan stood by his fence, hat pulled low, watching the horizon burn. He was only 32, but his face looked older, carved by sun, wind, and loss. The land stretched before him, cracked and stubborn like the man himself. A dozen horses and a handful of cattle grazed in the fading light. The barn leaned a little to one side, groaning in the wind. It wasn't much, but it was his. He'd built every plank with his father and brother before death had taken them, first cholera, then heartbreak, and finally silence. Now he worked the ranch alone, his only company, the wind and the ghosts buried behind the house. Thunder rolled over the hills like cannon fire. Jake felt it in his bones. Storms out here were fast and cruel. He moved toward the barn, boots sinking into the dirt as fat drops of rain began to fall. Inside, the horses stamped and whinnied, uneasy with the scent of electricity in the air. "Easy now," Jake murmured, patting the neck of his black Mustang. "It's just weather." Quote. The wind roared louder, slamming the barn doors. Jake hurried to latch them before they could tear loose, but then he heard it. Voices, faint at first, barely rising over the thunder. Then closer. Desperate. Human! He froze, one hand on his Colt. 45. No one traveled in weather like this, unless they were running from something or to something. The barn door suddenly flew open, slamming against the wall. 3 figures stumbled inside, women, soaked to the skin, gasping, and half-blind from the rain. The lantern light caught their faces as Jake's hand hovered near his gun. They were sisters. That much was clear from the resemblance. The eldest stood tall, despite her trembling, dark hair plastered to her cheeks, green eyes burning with a mix of fear and defiance. She shielded the others behind her like a wolf protecting her pack. "Please," she said, voice steady despite the storm. "We just need shelter. We mean no harm." Jake didn't move right away. The West taught a man to be careful, especially around strangers who looked too desperate to tell the truth. But the law of the frontier was simple. You didn't leave folks to die in the storm. "There's hay in the loft," he said finally, nodding toward the ladder. "It's dry up there. You can wait it out." Relief flashed across her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm Margaret. These are my sisters, Rose and Catherine." The name sounded false to Jake's ear, but he didn't challenge it. Plenty of people out here carried new names to bury old sins. He turned toward the rain. "Pumps out back if you need water." "I'll bring blankets, you don't have to." Margaret started, but he cut her off. "You'll catch your death in those clothes." Jake sprinted through the downpour toward his house. Inside, the fire still burned from earlier. He grabbed blankets, a bit of bread, and dried meat. His mother's old medicine box caught his eye, and he hesitated, then took it too. Something in the youngest sister's eyes, the pale one who looked like she hadn't eaten in days, had stirred something protective in him. When he returned, the barn was dim, except for the lantern. The sisters were huddled together in the corner, shaking from cold. The youngest, Catherine, was crying softly, while the middle sister, Rose, rubbed her back and whispered to her. Margaret stood apart, watchful, her jaw tight. Jake set down the supplies without stepping too close. "There's food," he said quietly. "And medicine if you need it." Margaret's eyes met his. "We can't take." "You can," Jake said firmly, "and you will." For the first time, the middle sister looked up. Rose. Auburn curls clung to her face, her eyes sharp and wild. There was a challenge there. "Not fear. Think you can handle us all, Cowboy?" she asked, half a smirk curling her lips. Jake held her gaze, calm and steady. "Reckon I can manage." For a moment, thunder filled the silence between them, a wall of sound that made the horses rear and whinny. The storm outside was wild, but inside, something else sparked. Something more dangerous than lightning. Margaret broke the tension. "We'll be gone by morning," she said. Jake nodded, though he knew it was a lie. Storm won't pass till then anyway. Get some rest. He left them in the glow of the lantern, but as he crossed back to the house through sheets of rain, a thought gnawed at him. Those weren't just travelers. The dirt on their clothes wasn't just from the road. Their hands told the truth. Scraped knuckles, torn nails. Not from riding, from fighting. Inside, Jake sat by the fire, rifle across his lap. The wind screamed through the cracks in the walls. Sleep wouldn't come. He couldn't shake the image of those women huddled in his barn. One broken, one fierce, one haunted. He'd built his peace on staying out of other people's trouble, but trouble had come anyway, and it had a woman's face. 3 of them, in fact. Lightning split the sky, turning the world white for an instant. Jake's gaze drifted toward the barn, now just a shadow against the storm. Whatever those sisters were running from, it wasn't finished chasing them. He could feel it, like the way a man feels the rumble of hooves long before he hears them. When the thunder rolled again, he whispered to the empty room. "Well, Jake Sullivan, looks like your quiet days are done, and somewhere out there beyond the hills and the rain, something or someone was already on its way." The morning sun rose hard and bright over the red horizon, turning the wet earth into steam. The storm had washed the dust from everything, leaving the world sharp and new. But Jake Sullivan felt no peace. He stood outside his cabin, hat low, rifle slung across his shoulder, eyes on the barn where his unexpected guests were stirring. The door creaked open. Margaret stepped out first, sleeves rolled up, face set in quiet determination. Her dark hair was still damp, and the bruises along her arms were clearer now in the light. Behind her came Rose, fiery and impatient, already rolling her shoulders like she had work to do. The youngest, Catherine, moved slowly, pale and frail, but smiling faintly as she looked toward the horses. "You know your way around horses," Jake said, not as a question, but as a fact. Margaret glanced up, wary. "We grew up with them." He nodded. "Then you can help me settle them. Storm's got 'em all spooked." They fell into work without further talk. Jake led, showing them the feed bins and the pump. Rose handled the shovel with practiced ease, her movements quick and sure. Margaret brushed down the horses, murmuring softly, her voice steadying the animals. Catherine carried water buckets that were too heavy for her, but refused to stop until Jake gently took one from her hands. "You're not built for hauling, Miss Catherine," he said. She smiled weakly. "I can try." Margaret's voice came from across the barn, sharper than she meant it to be. She shouldn't have to try. Jake didn't argue. The silence after her words was heavy, full of things unsaid. By midday, the work was done, and Jake found himself studying them in the harsh sunlight. These weren't helpless women. They moved like people used to hard work and to fear. But there was strength there, too, buried under exhaustion. "You'll stay for dinner?" he said finally. Margaret looked up, startled. "We've imposed enough." "We're hungry," Rose interrupted, voice bright but tired. "And he's offering." Margaret sighed, shooting her sister a look that said more than words could. Jake just chuckled. "House is that way. Wash up at the pump first." He went ahead to prepare what he had: beans, salt pork, and some potatoes gone soft around the edges. Not much, but it would fill their bellies. He was peeling the potatoes when they entered the house, hesitant, eyes darting over the sparse furniture and hand-built walls. "Come in," Jake said without turning. "Sit where you like." They did, slowly. The youngest, Catherine, spotted a small shelf of worn books by the window. "You read," she asked quietly, "when there's light enough." Jake said, "You're welcome to any of them." Her face lit up like dawn. "Thank you." She took a book carefully, running her fingers over the pages like they were something holy. "Catherine loves to read," Rose said with a small smile. "Used to read to us every night when we were small." "Before," Margaret said quickly, then stopped herself. Jake heard the word anyway, "before," and filed it away. "Smells good," Rose said, eager to change the subject. She kicked off her boots, grimacing at the sight of blisters. Jake noticed the cuts on her feet, deep and raw. "There's salve in that box on the shelf," he said, nodding to his mother's medicine kit. Use it. Rose found it and tended her wounds in silence. Margaret stood near the window, keeping watch, her hand never far from the small pistol holstered under her torn coat. Catherine sat at the table, lost in her book, her lips moving as she read silently. Jake watched them quietly, his hands still as the stew bubbled on the fire. "You expecting trouble?" he asked Margaret. She didn't look at him. "No, you're a poor liar." That made her turn, eyes flashing. "And you're too trusting, taking in 3 strangers, feeding them, offering your home. Most men would want something in return." Jake met her gaze evenly. "I'm not most men." Her expression softened slightly. "Number, you're not." Quote, they ate in silence for a while, the clink of spoons and the soft hiss of the fire filling the air. Jake couldn't help but notice how Margaret made sure her sisters got their fill before taking any for herself. Rose teased her gently, earning a fond glare in return. For a few minutes the house felt alive again, like the ghosts had stepped aside to make room for laughter. "There's a town east of here," Jake said, finally Millfield. "Sheriff there's fair enough. If you're in trouble, he could help." "No law," Margaret said sharply, too quickly. "We just need to keep moving." "Find work." "What kind of work?" Margaret hesitated. "We can cook, clean, sew. Honest work." "Rose knows horses better than most men," Catherine added, earning a warning look from her sister. "And I can teach. Reading, writing, numbers." Jake leaned back, thinking I could use help around here. "Fences are down, garden's a mess, and the barn needs fixing. Can't pay much, but there's room in food." Margaret's eyes narrowed. Why? Jake stood and began clearing dishes. "Because it's too much for one man," he said simply, "and I reckon you need a place to catch your breath." She stared at him for a long moment. "It's not safe. Not for you." Quote, "Let me worry about that." Rose stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. "Maggie, we need to talk." The 2 older sisters stepped outside. Through the window, Jake could see them arguing. Margaret gesturing sharply. Rose with hands on her hips, fierce and unbending. Catherine stayed at the table, tracing the edge of her bowl. "They're trying to protect you," Jake said quietly. Catherine's eyes lifted to his. "From what follows us?" Jake sat back down, voice gentle. "What does follow you?" For a moment she looked far older than her years evil. She whispered, "The kind that wears a fine coat and owns half the county." Before Jake could respond, the sisters returned. Margaret's face was pale, her jaw set. 3 days. She said, "We'll stay 3 days, help repair what's broken, then move on." Jake nodded. Fair enough. But deep down, he knew 3 days wouldn't be enough. Not for repairs, and not for whatever storm still followed them. That night, after the dishes were cleaned and the sisters had gone to rest, Jake stepped out onto the porch. The moon hung low, the land silent except for the restless whisper of the wind. From the barn came the sound of quiet voices, the sisters talking softly, their words carried faintly through the night. He couldn't make out everything, but one name cut clear through the dark. Morrison. Jake's hand tightened around the railing. Whoever Morrison was, he had brought these women to Jake's door. And Jake had a feeling that sooner or later, he'd come knocking too. The night stretched long and silent, broken only by the faint rustle of wind through the dry grass. Jake sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the horizon. The name Morrison echoed in his mind like a warning. Somewhere out there, he was sure, trouble was already saddling up. At dawn, Jake rose and found the sisters already working. Rose was in the corral, handling the horses with a sure touch. Margaret was in the garden, sleeves rolled to her elbows, while Catherine swept the porch, humming softly under her breath. For a moment, Jake almost forgot what danger might be coming. "It looked like a home again. You work like folks who've been running from something," he said finally, leaning against the fence. Margaret didn't look up. "We've been running for a long time." Jake studied her Morrison. Her hands froze on the hoe. Rose looked up from the corral, eyes wide, but it was Catherine who spoke first. "You heard us last night." "I did," Jake said, "and I'll ask again. Who is he?" Margaret straightened, her green eyes meeting his. He's a man who takes what he wants and kills what he can't own. The words hung between them, heavy and cold. Jake said nothing. He'd met men like that before. Rich, cruel, untouchable. But he'd also seen what happened when ordinary people stood up to them. "You can't fight a man like Morrison," Margaret said softly, reading his expression. "He owns the law. The sheriff. The judge. Even the preacher. Maybe," Jake said quietly. "But he doesn't own me." Rose stepped closer, dirt streaking her face, her voice low. "You don't know what you're saying. He killed our mother, Mr. Sullivan. Beat her to death because she refused him. We ran that night, and he's been hunting us ever since." Catherine's hands trembled as she spoke. "Every town we stop in, his men find us. We've had to hide, steal food, lie about who we are. We can't keep running forever." Jake took a long breath, eyes sweeping the land. "Then maybe it's time you stopped running." Margaret frowned. "What do you mean?" He turned toward the barn. "You three came here for shelter. You found it. I'm not letting him take that away. Mr. Sullivan." "Jake," he said, his voice calm but firm, "if this Morrison wants a fight, he'll get one, but he'll get it on my terms." The sisters exchanged glances. Rose's chin lifted in defiance. "You think you can handle us all, Jake Sullivan?" Jake smiled slightly. "Guess I'll have to." The next days passed in tense preparation. Jake showed them how to handle his extra rifles, how to aim true and shoot steady. Rose took to it naturally, confident and fearless. Margaret was slower, careful, methodical. Catherine struggled at first, the recoil jolting her small frame. But her determination burned brighter than her fear. At night, they fortified the house and barn, setting traps and hiding ammunition. Between the work, something changed. They laughed again, quietly at first, then freely. Catherine began reading aloud by lamplight. Rose teased Jake about his serious face, while Margaret softened just enough to smile when she caught him watching her sisters fondly. But peace never lasts long on the frontier. On the fourth morning, Jake climbed the barn roof to fix a loose shingle and spotted a dust cloud on the horizon. 5 riders, moving fast. He climbed down fast. "Company!" he shouted. Rose's head snapped up from the corral. "How many?" "5!" Maybe more. Behind Margaret's face went pale. "Morrison's men." Jake checked his gun. "Get your sisters inside." Now, within minutes, they were inside the house. Rose grabbed her rifle, eyes blazing. Catherine loaded ammunition with shaking hands. Margaret moved to the window, scanning the horizon like a soldier preparing for battle. The riders approached slowly, spreading out as they reached the gate. The leader was a hard-faced man with a scar across his chin. Afternoon. He called names. "Garrett. We're looking for 3 women. Sisters. Heard they might have come this way." Jake stood calm on the porch, rifle in hand. Lots of folks passed through. "I don't keep track." Garrett smiled coldly. "These are special. Belong to a man named Harrison Morrison. They stole from him. Killed his foreman, too." Jake didn't blink. "Must be dangerous women." "Dangerous enough. You seen 'em?" Jake's eyes stayed level. "Can't say that I have. You boys done watering your horses. Or you plan on trespassing further?" Garrett's men shifted uneasily, hands brushing their holsters. The air was thick enough to cut. Then the door behind Jake opened. Margaret stepped out, chin high, calm as Sunday. "These men bothering you, husband?" she asked. Jake nearly smiled but caught himself. "Just passing through." Dear Garrett's eyes narrowed. "Husband, huh?" Rose appeared next, wiping her hands on a rag. "Soup's burning, Maggie," she said casually, then looked at the men with a grin. "We having guests for dinner?" "Not today," Jake said. The scene threw Garrett off balance. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't a married couple with a homestead. His hand twitched toward his gun, then hesitated. Strange. Garrett said finally, "Old man Perkins swore he saw 3 women ride this way during the storm." Jake shrugged. "Perkins drinks. Sees ghosts, too." Garrett's smile turned to a sneer. Mr. Morrison don't like ghosts. If he finds out you're hiding them—" "I'm not hiding anyone," Jake interrupted, voice low and dangerous. "Now get off my land." Garrett studied him for a long, tense moment. Then he tipped his hat. "We'll be nearby. If you remember anything, you come find us." "I won't," Jake said. When they rode off, the sisters stepped down beside him. Margaret let out a shaky breath. "They'll be back." "I know." "What do we do now?" Catherine asked. Jake looked at the horizon where the riders had disappeared. "We get ready. Because next time, they won't be asking questions." That night, they armed themselves. Jake showed them how to use the rifles, where to take cover, how to reload fast. The barn was turned into a fortress. Rose practiced until her shoulder bruised, refusing to stop. Margaret kept watch from the window, eyes scanning the darkness. Catherine sat beside Jake, loading ammunition with trembling hands. "They'll come at dawn." Jake said quietly, "Morrison's kind always does." "What if we can't stop them?" Catherine whispered. "Then we die fighting," Rose said fiercely from across the room. Jake looked at them. 3 women who'd lost everything, yet still had courage burning brighter than any fire. "No," he said finally, "we live." Together the wind rose outside, carrying the faint echo of horses in the distance. Morning was coming. And with it, war. When the first shot rang out, it wasn't a surprise. It was a promise kept. Jake took his position at the window, rifle steady. The sisters spread out. Margaret at the back door, Rose in the barn loft, Catherine beside Jake. Shadows moved across the field. Men, rifles glinting in the light. "Hold," Jake murmured. "Wait until you see them clear. Closer, closer." Then one man raised his gun, and Jake fired first. The battle began in a thunder of gunfire and smoke. Bullets tore through wood and dust. Rose's rifle cracked from the barn. Margaret's pistol barked from the back window. Catherine, trembling, fired the shotgun and reloaded with shaking hands. Jake moved like a man possessed. Every shot was measured, clean, deadly. And then, suddenly, silence. The last echo faded into the desert air. Jake stepped outside, rifle still smoking. The yard was a battlefield. Bodies lay among the trampled grass. The sisters emerged one by one, Margaret bruised but steady, Rose with a bleeding arm, Catherine pale but alive. "They'll send more," Margaret said quietly. Jake nodded. "Then let them come. They'll find out what happens when you corner a Sullivan and 3 women with nothing left to lose." Rose smiled faintly through her pain. "Think you can handle us all now?" Jake looked at her, at all of them, and felt something shift inside him, deep and unshakable together. He said, "We can handle anything." The wind carried away the smell of gunpowder, leaving behind only silence and the first hint of peace. The battle was over, but the story of Jake Sullivan and the 3 sisters had just begun.